On November 19th, 2002, Michael Jackson was staying at the Hotel Adlon in Berlin, Germany. He had arrived in the city to receive an award, and as was typical whenever he traveled, a crowd of fans had gathered outside the hotel, chanting his name and hoping for a glimpse of the superstar. Jackson's three children were with him: Prince Michael, who was 5 years old, Paris, who was 4, and Prince Michael II, known as Blanket, who was just 9 months old. The fans outside were persistent, and Jackson, perhaps caught up in the moment or wanting to acknowledge their devotion, made a decision that would become one of the most controversial moments of his life. He stepped onto a fourth-floor balcony, holding Blanket in his arms. And then, for reasons that remain debated to this day, he extended the baby over the railing, dangling him above the crowd below for several seconds before pulling him back. The incident was captured by photographers and broadcast around the world. The backlash was immediate and fierce. Child safety advocates condemned Jackson's actions as reckless and dangerous. The media seized on the moment as evidence of Jackson's poor judgment and questionable fitness as a parent. Jackson issued an apology the next day, calling it a terrible mistake born from being caught up in the excitement. But the damage was done. The balcony incident became a defining image, a moment that encapsulated the tension between Jackson's desire to protect his children and the invasive nature of his fame. The story of Michael Jackson's children begins not with the balcony incident, but with the decisions Jackson made about their upbringing from the moment they were born. Prince Michael Jackson Jr. was born on February 13th, 1997. Paris Michael Katherine Jackson was born on April 3rd, 1998. And Prince Michael Jackson II, later known as Blanket and eventually renamed Bigi, was born on February 21st, 2002. From the very beginning, Jackson was determined to shield them from the public eye in ways that were unprecedented for the children of a global celebrity. He refused to show their faces in public. Whenever they left the house, the children wore masks, veils, or had blankets draped over their heads to obscure their features. To many observers, this seemed extreme, even cruel. Why would a father hide his children's faces? Why not let them live normal lives? But to understand Jackson's choices, you have to understand the world he grew up in. Jackson had been a child star, thrust into the spotlight at the age of 5 when the Jackson 5 signed with Motown Records. He had spent his entire childhood and adolescence being photographed, followed, and scrutinized. He had no privacy, no anonymity, no sense of what it meant to be just a kid. In interviews, he spoke often about the pain of this experience, about watching other children play while he was stuck in recording studios and hotel rooms. He described feeling like he had been robbed of something fundamental, something he could never get back. And when he became a father, he was determined that his children would not suffer the same fate. Jackson's approach to protecting his children was rooted in a simple calculation. If the public never saw their faces, they could grow up with a degree of normalcy. They could go to parks, attend events, and move through the world without being instantly recognized. The masks and veils were not punishments. They were shields. Jackson believed that by keeping his children's identities hidden, he was giving them a gift, the gift of childhood that he himself had been denied. But the world did not see it that way. The image of masked children being led through airports and shopping malls was unsettling to many. It seemed dystopian, like something out of a science fiction film. Critics argued that Jackson was projecting his own trauma onto his children, that he was depriving them of normal social interactions and making them objects of curiosity rather than protecting them. The mothers of Jackson's children were also kept largely out of the public eye, adding another layer of mystery and speculation. Prince and Paris's mother was Debbie Rowe, a dermatology nurse who had worked for Dr. Arnold Klein, Jackson's longtime dermatologist. Rowe and Jackson married in 1996, shortly after she became pregnant with Prince. The marriage was unconventional by any standard. Rowe later described it as an arrangement, a way for Jackson to have the children he desperately wanted. She gave birth to Prince and Paris, and then in 1999, she and Jackson divorced. Rowe agreed to give Jackson full custody of the children, and she largely disappeared from their lives for several years. The identity of Blanket's mother has never been publicly confirmed. Jackson said only that the child was born via surrogate and that he wanted to keep the mother's identity private. The secrecy surrounding the children's mothers fueled endless speculation and tabloid stories. Rumors circulated that Jackson was not the biological father, that the children had been conceived using donor sperm, that the whole arrangement was a sham. These rumors were invasive and hurtful, but they were also indicative of the intense scrutiny that surrounded every aspect of Jackson's life. For the tabloids, Jackson's children were another mystery to be solved, another story to be sold. And for Jackson, every article, every photograph, every speculative piece was a reminder of why he felt the need to hide his children in the first place. The balcony incident in Berlin was a breaking point, a moment when Jackson's protective instincts collided with his desire to connect with his fans. Eyewitness accounts and video footage from that day show Jackson stepping onto the balcony with a blanket in his arms, the baby's face obscured by a towel. The crowd below was cheering, cameras flashing. Jackson waved, and then, in a gesture that seemed spontaneous, he lifted blanket up and extended him over the railing. The baby's legs dangled in the air for what witnesses estimated was 3 to 5 seconds before Jackson pulled him back. The crowd gasped. Photographers captured the moment from multiple angles, and within hours the images were on every news channel and front page around the world. Jackson's apology came quickly. In a statement released the next day, he said, "I got caught up in the excitement of the moment. I would never intentionally endanger the lives of my children." He described the incident as a terrible lapse in judgment and expressed regret for frightening people. But the apology did little to quell the outrage. Child safety organizations called for investigations. Some suggested that Jackson's fitness as a parent should be evaluated. German authorities briefly considered whether to take action, but ultimately decided that the incident, while reckless, did not constitute a crime. The balcony incident became a cultural touchstone, referenced in comedy sketches, news debates, and discussions about celebrity parenting. But what is often lost in the retelling of the balcony story is the context of Jackson's life at that time. By 2002, he was already under intense scrutiny. The 1993 child abuse allegations had damaged his reputation. Even though he was never charged, his financial situation was precarious, with mounting debts and questionable business decisions. And the media coverage of him had grown increasingly hostile, focusing on his eccentricities and controversies rather than his music. Jackson was a man under siege, and his children were among the few sources of joy and normalcy in his life. The balcony incident, while undeniably dangerous, was also a moment of desperation, an attempt to share his children with the fans who had supported him, even as he tried to protect them from the very world those fans represented. The masks and veils that Jackson's children wore became a symbol of his parenting philosophy, but they were also a source of constant debate. Supporters argued that Jackson was doing what any responsible parent in his position would do, protecting his children from a media environment that had proven itself to be ruthless and invasive. Critics argued that the masks were harmful, that they isolated the children and made them targets of curiosity and ridicule. Psychologists weighed in, offering differing opinions. Some suggested that the mask could create a sense of shame or otherness in the children, making them feel that there was something wrong with their identities. Others argued that, in the context of Jackson's level of fame, the masks were a reasonable precaution, a way to give the children some semblance of privacy in an otherwise impossible situation. The children themselves, as they grew older, have offered their own perspectives on their upbringing. Paris Jackson, in particular, has been the most outspoken. In interviews given after her father's death, she described the masks as uncomfortable and sometimes embarrassing, but she also acknowledged that they allowed her to have experiences that would not have been possible otherwise. She spoke about going to Disneyland and other public places, able to enjoy them without being swarmed by fans or photographers. She said that her father explained the masks to her and her brothers as a way to keep them safe, and that as a child she accepted this explanation. It was only later, after Jackson's death, and as she stepped into the public eye herself, that she began to grapple with the complexities of her unusual upbringing. Prince Jackson, the eldest, has also spoken about his childhood. though he has been more reserved than his sister. In interviews, he has emphasized his father's love and dedication, describing Jackson as a hands-on parent who was involved in every aspect of their lives. He has said that the masks were just one part of a broader effort to give them a normal childhood, which also included homeschooling, regular routines, and efforts to instill values and discipline. Prince has described his father as strict but fair, someone who wanted his children to understand the value of education, hard work, and kindness. The masks, in Prince's telling, were not a burden but a tool, one of many strategies Jackson employed to navigate the impossible challenge of raising children in the glare of global fame. Blanket, who now goes by the name Bigi, has remained the most private of the three. He was only 7 years old when Jackson died, and his memories of his father are more fragmented than those of his older siblings. In the few public statements he has made, Bigi has expressed a desire to honor his father's legacy while also carving out his own identity, separate from the intense scrutiny that defined his early years. The balcony incident, which occurred when he was an infant, is something he has had to live with as a defining moment in his public narrative. Even though he has no memory of it, the media's treatment of Jackson's children extended beyond the masks and the balcony incident. Photographers and tabloid journalists pursued the family relentlessly, staking out their homes, following them on outings, and attempting to capture images that could be sold to the highest bidder. Jackson's Neverland Ranch, which was supposed to be a private sanctuary, was regularly surveilled by helicopters and long-range cameras. When Jackson traveled, paparazzi would book rooms in the same hotels, bribe staff for information, and use aggressive tactics to get close to the family. The children, despite the masks, were not immune to this attention. They grew up knowing that they were being watched, that their every move was of interest to people they would never meet. The ethical questions raised by the paparazzi's pursuit of Jackson's children are significant. In many countries, there are laws designed to protect the privacy of minors, particularly the children of public figures. But these laws are often weak or poorly enforced, and the financial incentives for photographers to capture exclusive images are enormous. A photograph of Jackson's children without their masks could sell for tens or even hundreds of thousands of dollars. This created a perverse dynamic, where the more Jackson tried to hide his children, the more valuable their unmasked images became, and the more aggressive the paparazzi became in trying to capture them. Jackson's efforts to protect his children were not limited to masks and seclusion. He also employed a team of security personnel who were tasked with managing the media presence around the family. These bodyguards and security experts worked to create buffer zones, to plan routes that minimized exposure, and to intervene when photographers became too aggressive. But the scale of the challenge was immense. Jackson was one of the most famous people in the world, and his children, by virtue of being his children, were celebrities themselves, whether they wanted to be or not. No amount of security could completely shield them from the public's gaze. The tension between Jackson's protective instincts and the realities of his fame created a paradox. By hiding his children, he made them more interesting to the media and the public. The mystery of what they looked like, who their mothers were, and what their lives were like behind closed doors fueled endless speculation and coverage. In some ways, Jackson's efforts to protect his children backfired, drawing more attention to them rather than less. This paradox is not unique to Jackson. It is a challenge faced by many celebrities who try to shield their children from the public eye. The more you hide, the more people want to see. The more you guard your privacy, the more valuable that privacy becomes to those who would exploit it. The balcony incident can be understood as a moment when this paradox reached a breaking point. Jackson wanted to share his joy, to show his fans the baby he was so proud of, but he also wanted to protect that baby from the very people he was showing him to. The gesture was contradictory and ultimately dangerous, a physical manifestation of the impossible position Jackson found himself in as both a father and a global icon. After the balcony incident, Jackson became even more cautious about public appearances with his children. The masks stayed on and the family retreated further from the public eye. But the scrutiny did not diminish. In 2003, when Jackson was arrested on child molestation charges, his children became part of the media narrative once again. Reporters speculated about how the allegations and the subsequent trial would affect them, about whether they would be called to testify, about what they knew or did not know. The trial, which took place in 2005, was a traumatic period for the entire family. Jackson was ultimately acquitted on all charges, but the toll on his health and his relationship with his children was significant. During the trial, Jackson's parenting came under scrutiny in ways that went beyond the balcony incident. Prosecutors and media commentators questioned his judgment, his lifestyle, and his fitness to care for his children. The defense countered by presenting Jackson as a devoted father who had made unconventional choices but always with his children's best interests at heart. Witnesses testified to Jackson's attentiveness, his involvement in his children's education, and his efforts to create a stable home environment despite the chaos surrounding him. The trial highlighted the extent to which Jackson's role as a father was inseparable from his public persona, and the extent to which his children were affected by the controversies that defined his life. After the trial, Jackson largely withdrew from public life. He moved with his children to Bahrain, then to Ireland, and eventually to Las Vegas and Los Angeles, living in rented homes and trying to find some measure of peace. The children continued to be homeschooled, and Jackson continued to insist on the masks when they were in public. But as the children grew older, they began to assert their own desires and identities. Paris, in particular, started to push back against the restrictions, wanting to interact with other children and experience a more typical childhood. Jackson, according to those close to him, struggled with this. He wanted to protect his children, but he also wanted them to be happy, and those two goals were not always compatible. Jackson's death in June 2009 changed everything for his children. Suddenly, they were no longer hidden behind masks and veils. They appeared at his funeral, their faces visible to the world for the first time in a meaningful way. Paris, then 11 years old, gave a tearful speech at the memorial service, telling the world that her father had been the best father she could imagine. The image of the three children, grieving and exposed, was heartbreaking. They had lost their father, and they had also lost the protection he had provided, the buffer between them and the relentless scrutiny of the public. In the years since Jackson's death, his children have navigated their way into the public eye on their own terms. Paris has become a model, actress, and musician, using social media to connect with fans and to share her thoughts and experiences. She has been open about her struggles with mental health, about the challenges of growing up in such an unusual environment, and about her efforts to honor her father's legacy while also establishing her own identity. Prince has pursued a career in entertainment production and philanthropy, working behind the scenes and focusing on causes that were important to his father. Bigi has remained the most private, occasionally appearing in public but largely staying out of the spotlight. The question of whether Jackson's approach to raising his children was right or wrong is one that does not have a simple answer. On one hand, the masks and the seclusion were extreme measures that set the children apart and made them objects of curiosity. On the other hand, they allowed the children to have experiences and a degree of anonymity that would have been impossible otherwise. The balcony incident was a lapse in judgment, a moment of recklessness that could have had tragic consequences. But it was also a moment that reflected the impossible pressures Jackson faced, the constant tension between his role as a father and his status as a global icon. The broader issue raised by Jackson's story is the question of how society treats the children of celebrities. Should they be afforded privacy and protection, or are they fair game for media coverage by virtue of their parents' fame? Different countries have different laws and norms around this issue. In France, for example, there are strict privacy laws that protect the children of public figures, and paparazzi who violate these laws can face significant penalties. In the United States and the United Kingdom, the protections are weaker, and the culture of celebrity journalism is more aggressive. Jackson's children grew up in an environment where their privacy was constantly under threat, where their images had monetary value, and where their father's efforts to protect them were often portrayed as bizarre or controlling. The media's role in this dynamic cannot be overlooked. The tabloids and paparazzi that pursued Jackson's children were responding to public demand. People wanted to see what the children looked like, wanted to know details about their lives, wanted to be part of the story. This demand created the market that made the pursuit of Jackson's children profitable. In this sense, the public, the media, and Jackson himself were all participants in a system that treated children as commodities, as sources of content and revenue, rather than as individuals deserving of protection and privacy. Jackson's own childhood, marked by exploitation and a lack of boundaries, clearly influenced his approach to parenting. He was trying to give his children what he had never had, a childhood that was theirs, not the public's. But in doing so, he created a different kind of abnormality, one that was defined by secrecy and isolation rather than exposure and performance. Neither extreme is ideal. The challenge of raising children in the public eye is finding a balance between protection and freedom, between privacy and normalcy. Jackson, for all his love and good intentions, struggled to find that balance. His children have had to live with the consequences of his choices, both the protective measures that shielded them and the controversies that defined their early years. The legacy of Jackson's parenting is complex and multifaceted. His children remember him as a loving and devoted father who did everything he could to protect them. The public remembers the masks, the balcony incident, and the controversies. Both perspectives are valid, and both are incomplete. Jackson was a man who loved his children deeply and who was also deeply flawed, who made choices that were born from trauma and love in equal measure. His story is a reminder that parenting, particularly under the pressures of extraordinary fame, is never simple, and that the decisions parents make, however well-intentioned, can have lasting and unpredictable effects. The masks are gone now. Paris, Prince, and Bigi live their lives in the open, navigating the legacy of their father and the challenges of their own identities. They have spoken about their experiences with a mix of gratitude, frustration, and reflection. They acknowledge the strangeness of their upbringing, but they also defend their father's intentions and his love. And they continue to grapple with the question that defined their childhood. How do you protect something precious in a world that sees it as a commodity? That question is not just about Michael Jackson and his children. It is about all of us, about how we value privacy, how we treat children, and how we navigate the tension between curiosity and respect in an age where everything and everyone can be seen, captured, and consumed.